A rich man's daughter had been in a coma for 3 years with no sign of improvement. Then a mysterious street boy appeared in the hospital garden, claiming to know secrets that no one had ever known. The meeting between the two revealed an inexplicable connection between worlds and awakened forces that medicine could not explain. What happened that night was a miracle, and nothing would ever be the same again. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The rain battered the car windows as Richard Matthews drove cautiously along the winding road. Beside him, his 7-year-old daughter Sophie hummed a melody that her mother used to sing. The girl's eyes, identical to Helen's, shone with the innocence that Richard had fought so hard to preserve since the day his wife had passed away during the birth of their second child. "Daddy, can we stop to see the ocean?" asked Sophie, pointing to a sign indicating a nearby lookout. Richard smiled, adjusting the rear-view mirror. "Of course, Princess. Let's just wait for the rain to let up a bit." This outing was an attempt to reconnect with his daughter. In the past 3 years since Helen had left them, Richard had immersed himself in work, transforming his small technology company into an empire. Professional success, however, took its toll at home. Babysitters took turns caring for Sophie while he spent sleepless nights closing deals and expanding his business. It was Sophie's drawing at school that awakened him. "Hey family," where the father was represented by a distant dot almost off the paper. The teacher called, concerned, and Richard finally saw the growing chasm between him and his only daughter. "Look, Daddy, the truck is coming really fast." Sophie's voice sounded alarmed. Richard barely had time to react. The intense lights momentarily blinded him. The impact was violent, and the world spun in slow motion. The last sound he registered was Sophie's scream before everything went dark. He woke up in the hospital with minor injuries and a searing pain in his chest that had nothing to do with physical injuries. Sophie was in a coma, severe head trauma, the doctor explained gravely. The chances of recovery were minimal, almost non-existent. "I want to see her," was all he could say. Days turned into weeks. Richard remained by Sophie's bedside, watching her artificial breathing, counting each heartbeat recorded on the monitors. His beard grew, his eyes developed deep circles, but he refused to leave. "Mr. Matthews, we need to talk about the next steps," said Dr. Carmen, the neurologist in charge of the case. "The tests show minimal brain activity. We need to discuss realistic options." "The only realistic option is for my daughter to wake up," he replied, without taking his eyes off Sophie. "And I'll be here when that happens." The business empire he had built began to crumble. His partner, Frank, tried to keep the business running, but without Richard's presence, investors began to withdraw their support. Richard didn't care. He sold his shares, his beach house, his luxury cars, all to ensure Sophie had the best possible treatment. 6 months after the accident, Richard was no longer recognized by former colleagues. The elegant, calculating businessman had given way to a man in simple clothes with a distant look. He moved into the hospital, converting Sophie's private room into his new home. He read to her daily, told stories about Helen, combed her golden hair that continued to grow as if defying the inert state of her body. "Mr. Matthews, we've found a specialist in Switzerland," Frank informed him, who still maintained contact. Despite Richard's withdrawal from business, he has a new approach for cases like Sophie's. Dr. Klaus Weber arrived 2 weeks later with state-of-the-art equipment and an international team. He subjected Sophie to a battery of tests and neurological stimuli. Richard observed each procedure with a mixture of hope and fear. "There are interesting response patterns," the specialist explained after days of evaluation. "But I can't promise miracles. The human brain still holds many mysteries." Richard clung to that thread of hope. He sold the last valuable assets he owned to finance the experimental treatment proposed by Weber. Time continued its relentless course. Sophie turned 8 in the hospital bed, with a small party organized by Richard and some nurses who had become attached to the case. "Happy birthday to you, dear Sophie," Richard sang, holding his daughter's motionless little hand in his. A solitary tear ran down his tired face when the singing ended, and silence once again prevailed. It was that night when Richard first met the boy in the hospital garden. Exhausted after another day of waiting, he went down to breathe fresh air. The garden, illuminated only by a few dim lamps, seemed deserted at that hour. He sat on a bench under an old mango tree and closed his eyes. "She likes it when you sing," said a childish voice, startling Richard. A boy of approximately 10 years old was standing in front of him. He wore a simple yellow t-shirt and jean shorts. His eyes had a strange depth for someone so young. "How do you know I sing to someone?" asked Richard, intrigued. "To Sophie," the boy replied naturally. "She especially likes it when you sing that song about stars that her mother taught her." Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. "Who are you? How do you know my daughter?" "My name is Gabriel," the boy replied, sitting beside him. "I know Sophie because we're connected. She's lost in a place between worlds, and I can help her find her way back." Under any other circumstance, Richard would have dismissed this as childish fantasy, but something in the boy's serenity, in the precision with which he spoke of details that no one could know, made him listen. "Sophie told me about the necklace you gave her on the day of the accident," Gabriel continued. "The little butterfly, pendant that belonged to her mother. She holds it in her dreams, you know? It's her anchor to the real world." Richard placed his hand on his chest, where he had kept the necklace since the accident. The doctors had removed all of Sophie's belongings during the emergency procedures, and he had kept the necklace with him ever since. He had never mentioned this detail to anyone. How do you know about that?" "I already told you. We're connected, Sophie and I, since the accident." "Were you there?" Richard felt his heart race. Gabriel looked away for the first time. "In a way, but that doesn't matter now. What matters is that I can help her come back, if you'll allow." "Cuz, I would do anything to have my daughter back," Richard replied, his voice choked with emotion. "Not everything is so simple," Gabriel warned with wisdom incompatible with his age. "There's a price for every choice, a balance that needs to be maintained. But if you truly believe her place is still here, I can show you a path." "Please," whispered Richard. "Tell me what I need to do." Gabriel extended his hand to him. "First, you need to trust. Trust in the impossible, in the inexplicable. Can you do that, Richard?" In that moment, under the dim light of the hospital garden, Richard Matthews, former successful businessman, a man of numbers and concrete facts, made a choice that would forever change the course of his existence. "I can," he answered, holding the small extended hand. Gabriel smiled, a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire garden. "Then let's visit Sophie. It's time for her to know she has a choice to make." As they walked toward the hospital, Richard didn't notice that for a brief moment, the boy's silhouette seemed translucent under the streetlights, nor that his feet barely left marks in the damp garden soil. The hospital corridors seemed different. That night, Richard followed Gabriel, observing how the nurses and doctors on duty seemed not to notice the boy's presence. When he questioned this, Gabriel just smiled. "Some people only see what they're prepared to see," he replied enigmatically. When they reached Sophie's room, Richard felt a tightness in his chest, as always happened. His daughter remained motionless, connected to machines that monitored her vital signs. Gabriel approached the bed with disconcerting familiarity. "Hello, Sophie," said the boy, lightly touching the girl's hand. "I brought your father to help us today." Richard watched in astonishment as Gabriel closed his eyes and began to whisper, words in a language he had never heard before. It seemed ancient, musical, with cadences that reverberated through the silent room. Then something extraordinary happened. A bluish light, soft as the reflection of the moon on water, emanated from the boy's hands and enveloped Sophie's body. "What's happening?" asked Richard, divided between fear and fascination. "I'm opening her path," Gabriel explained without interrupting the contact, "so that you can see her as I see her." The light intensified, and Richard felt a sudden dizziness. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the hospital room. He found himself in a lush garden with leafy trees and vibrant flowers he had never seen before. In the center of this garden, sitting under a mango tree, identical to the one at the hospital, was Sophie. "Sophie!" he shouted, running toward her. The girl looked at him, her eyes widening in recognition and joy. "Daddy, you came to visit me." Richard hugged her, feeling her solid, real body, breathing in her child's scent. Tears flowed freely down his face. "My love, I've missed you so much." "I know, Daddy. I hear you every day," Sophie smiled. "I like it when you read stories and sing to me." Gabriel appeared beside them, observing the reunion with a serene smile. "Where are we?" asked Richard, looking around. "What is this place?" "It's difficult to explain," Gabriel replied. "It's not exactly a place, but a state. Sophie is here because her body can't fully house her now, but her spirit is too strong to depart. So she's between worlds," Richard tried to understand. "Yes, and the time has come when she needs to choose." Gabriel became serious. "Sophie can continue here, where there is no pain or suffering, or she can try to return. But the way back is difficult, and there are no guarantees." Richard looked at his daughter, who was playing with a blue butterfly that had landed on her hand. His heart broke at the thought that he could lose her forever. "And if she chooses to stay here, then her body will gradually lose its connection with her spirit," Gabriel explained gently. "The machines will indicate what the doctors already expect, and if she chooses to return, it will be a struggle, painful, uncertain. She'll have to relearn everything, reconnect with a damaged body. There will be days when you both will question whether the choice was correct." Sophie approached, the butterfly now perched on her shoulder. "Gabriel tells me stories about the world, Daddy, about how people are strong even when facing difficult things." Richard knelt to be at his daughter's height. "Do you want to come home, my love?" "I'm afraid," Sophie confessed. "Gabriel says it will hurt, that it will be like learning to walk again after I fell off the bicycle, but much worse." "I'll be with you every step of the way," Richard promised. Sophie looked at Gabriel, who nodded encouragingly. "I need to think, Daddy. Gabriel says I have until the next full moon to decide." Richard felt the world around him begin to fade. "What's happening?" "Our time here is ending," Gabriel explained. "It's difficult to maintain the connection for long." "Sophie," Richard called, feeling his daughter slip through his fingers like fine sand. "Come back tomorrow, Daddy." Sophie's voice sounded distant. "I'll be waiting." Richard opened his eyes again in the hospital room. The sun was rising on the horizon, its rays penetrating through the blinds. Gabriel had disappeared, and Sophie remained motionless in the bed. However, something had changed. Between the girl's inert fingers, a small blue paper butterfly that wasn't there before. In the following days, Richard divided himself between two worlds. During the day, he remained by Sophie's side in the hospital, talking with doctors, supervising treatments. At night, with Gabriel's help, he visited his daughter in the mysterious garden where they could interact as before the accident. "Doctor," Carmen noticed subtle changes in Sophie's tests. "There's an increase in brain activity that I can't explain," she admitted, reviewing the results. "I don't want to create false hopes, but something is happening." Richard just nodded, keeping his secret. He feared that if he shared his experiences, he would be considered delusional, perhaps even separated from Sophie. However, his transformation was visible. He started shaving again, exchanged his worn clothes for clean, simple pieces, and his eyes regained some of their lost sparkle. Frank, his former partner, noticed the change during a visit. "You seem different, Richard. More present." "I have reasons to believe Sophie will come back," he replied simply. The news about the mysterious improvement in Sophie's neurological indicators began to circulate in the hospital. Doctors from other departments asked to analyze the case. Dr. Carmen, although skeptical, allowed new tests. "It's extraordinary," commented Dr. Mitchell, a pediatric neurology specialist. "Areas that were completely inactive show signs of regeneration. I haven't seen anything like this in 30 years of practice." While medical interest grew, Richard continued his nightly meetings with Sophie and Gabriel. The girl seemed stronger with each visit, asking questions about the real world, about her home, her toys. "Daddy, do you remember Mr. Whiskers?" she asked about her pet cat. "Of course, Princess. He's with Aunt Martha, but he misses you." "I want to see him again," Sophie decided, "and I want to go back to school too." Richard realized that his daughter was leaning toward the decision to return, and his heart filled with hope and fear simultaneously. Gabriel had been clear about the challenges they would face. One night, intrigued about Gabriel's true identity, Richard decided to investigate. Taking advantage of the boy having gone to fetch something important, he asked Sophie, "Sweetie, how did you meet Gabriel?" Sophie was playing with colorful flowers, weaving them into a crown. "He was here when I arrived. He said he was waiting for me." "And did he tell you where he came from?" "Yes," Sophie replied naturally. "He was in the other car, Daddy, in the truck that hit ours." Richard felt his blood freeze. "What do you mean?" "Gabriel was in the truck. He told me he couldn't stay after the accident, but he promised to help me find my way back if I wanted." Sophie looked into her father's eyes. "He's an angel, isn't he?" Before Richard could fully process this revelation, Gabriel returned, carrying what appeared to be a small music box. "It's time to show you both something important," the boy announced. "Sophie, remember when I told you about choices and consequences?" The girl nodded, suddenly serious. "This box contains memories," Gabriel explained. "Memories of what might happen if you choose to return." He opened the box, and a soft melody filled the air. Images began to float around them like soap bubbles. Sophie in a wheelchair, struggling to hold a pencil. Sophie crying in frustration during physical therapy sessions. Richard exhausted, asleep beside his daughter's bed at home. But there were other images too. Sophie taking her first steps again, with Richard crying with joy. Sophie reading aloud, overcoming each obstacle. Teenage Sophie, helping other children with disabilities. "This is the path back," Gabriel said softly. "There will be pain, tears, and moments when you both will question the choice, but there will also be joy, triumph, and a greater purpose that will reveal itself with time." Richard observed the images with a heavy heart, finally understanding the magnitude of the choice his daughter faced. "And if I stay here?" asked Sophie. Gabriel closed the box and the images disappeared. "Then your father will eventually have to move on without you. He will suffer, but one day he'll find peace, and you'll stay here with me and others like us until you're ready for the next step." Sophie looked at her father, her eyes reflecting wisdom beyond her years. "I'm scared, Daddy, but I also feel homesick. For the world, for home, for Mr. Whiskers." She paused. "And you need me there, don't you?" Richard couldn't contain his tears. "I will always need you, my love. But this decision is yours, and I'll support whatever choice you make." Sophie turned to Gabriel. "How much time do I have to decide?" "The full moon is tomorrow," the boy replied. "When it's at its highest point in the sky, the path will open or close." Richard felt the world begin to fade again. It was time to return. He hugged Sophie tightly, fearing it might be the last time. "I love you, Daddy," Sophie whispered in his ear. "Whatever my choice, never forget that." When Richard opened his eyes in the hospital room, the blue paper butterfly had transformed into a crown of dried flowers between Sophie's fingers. And for the first time in 3 years, a solitary tear was running down the girl's motionless face. The news about the tear on Sophie's face spread quickly through the hospital. Dr. Carmen, initially skeptical, documented the event as an unexplained autonomic response and ordered a new battery of tests. The results left the medical team perplexed. There was a significant increase in brain activity, especially in regions associated with emotions. "I don't want to create false hopes," the doctor said cautiously, "but these changes are unusual for someone in Sophie's condition." Richard just nodded, keeping to himself the knowledge about the true battle his daughter was waging between two worlds. During the day, he methodically reviewed medical records, questioned specialists, and sought to understand every aspect of the possible recovery process. If Sophie chose to return, he would be prepared. At night, he went to the hospital garden earlier than usual. The full moon was already beginning to rise on the horizon, silvery and imposing. Gabriel was waiting for him under the mango tree, his countenance more serious than normal. "Before we go to Sophie, I need you to understand something important," said the boy. "If she decides to return, there will be a price to pay." Richard frowned. "What kind of price?" "A balance must be maintained," Gabriel explained. "For Sophie to fully return, something of equal value must be offered." "I'm ready to give anything," Richard replied without hesitation. "My fortune, my possessions, my own life if necessary." Gabriel shook his head. "It doesn't work that way. It's not something you choose to give, but something that will be taken. And we never know exactly what it will be until the moment of the exchange." A shiver ran down Richard's spine. "That sounds frightening." "It's the nature of balance," Gabriel replied simply. "It's neither good nor bad, it just is." At that moment, Richard was seized by a doubt that had tormented him since Sophie's revelation. "Gabriel, were you really in the truck? That hit us?" The boy briefly looked away. "Yes, I was with my father. He was the driver." "And you?" Richard couldn't complete the question. "I didn't survive the accident," Gabriel confirmed, his calm voice contrasting with the gravity of the revelation. "My father tried to swerve when he realized he would lose control, but it was too late." Richard felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. All this time, he had been guided by someone who... "It's not what you're thinking," Gabriel interrupted as if reading his thoughts. "I'm not a ghost or a hallucination. I'm a guide. Some of us remain for a while to help others find their way." "Why you? Why help Sophie?" "Because we're connected by the accident, and because I always had this ability even before." Gabriel smiled nostalgically. "My mother used to say I had a gift, I could sense others' pain, help heal it sometimes. Injured animals always sought me out. Lost people crossed my path." Richard tried to process all of this. "Your parents, do they know you're here?" "They sense my presence, sometimes in dreams," Gabriel replied. "Maybe one day you can meet them and tell them about Sophie. That would bring some meaning to their loss." The moon continued its ascent in the sky. Gabriel looked at the antique watch that Richard hadn't noticed on his wrist before. "It's time. Sophie is waiting for us." As on the other nights, Richard felt the familiar dizziness and soon was in the dreamlike garden. Sophie was waiting for them in the same place as always, but something was different. She wore a simple white dress and had flowers in her hair. She seemed more vibrant, more present. "Daddy," she exclaimed, running to hug him. "I was waiting for you." Richard hugged her tightly, knowing it could be the last time. "Have you decided, my love?" Sophie nodded, looking at Gabriel, who remained a short distance away. "I want to go back, Daddy. I want to try." Relief and fear mixed in Richard's chest. "Are you sure? It will be difficult, you know that." "I know," Sophie replied with surprising maturity. "But I saw something today that helped me decide." "What did you see?" "Mommy," Sophie answered simply. "She came to visit me. She said she loves me very much, but that it's not my time to stay here yet. She said you still need me there." Richard felt tears burn his eyes. Helen, even after departing, she still looked after them. Gabriel approached, carrying the music box. "The moon is almost at its highest point. It's time to begin." The boy opened the box and the soft melody filled the air again. But this time, instead of images, a bluish light began to emanate from the box, enveloping the three in a luminous cocoon. "Richard," Gabriel called with seriousness, "do you understand that there's a price to be paid and that we don't know what it will be until the moment of the exchange?" "I understand," he replied, determined. "Sophie," Gabriel turned to the girl, "do you understand that the path will be difficult, that there will be pain, frustration, and moments when you'll wish you had chosen differently?" "I understand," Sophie replied, squeezing her father's hand. "But we'll be together, won't we, Daddy?" "Always," Richard promised. Gabriel nodded, satisfied. Then it is decided. The light intensified, pulsing to the rhythm of the box's melody. Gabriel began to recite words in the ancient language again, each syllable reverberating through the garden. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate, and the flowers around them changed color from white to deep blue. "Close your eyes, Sophie," Gabriel instructed. "Visualize your body in the hospital. Feel each part of it, even those that seem distant now. Your body is waiting for you." Sophie obeyed, her expression concentrated. The light around her became more intense, almost blinding. "Richard," Gabriel turned to him, "you must guide her back. Hold her hand and don't let go, no matter what happens. It will be like swimming against a powerful current." Richard firmly held his daughter's hand, feeling it surprisingly solid and warm. Gabriel placed his hands over theirs, forming a bridge. "Now," said the boy, "when I count to 3, you will walk together toward that light." On the horizon of the garden, a luminous opening had formed, like a portal between worlds. "1," Gabriel began. The wind increased around them, making the trees bend. 2, the ground shook harder, and Richard felt as if something was pulling Sophie away from him. He squeezed her hand more tightly. 3! They walked toward the light, fighting against the invisible resistance that seemed to want to keep them separated. Each step was more difficult than the previous one. Richard felt as if he were dragging not just Sophie, but an immense weight. "Don't let go of my hand, princess," he shouted above the roar of the wind. "I'm trying, Daddy." Sophie's voice sounded distant despite being side by side. As they approached the portal, the resistance increased. Richard felt his strength ebbing, but refused to give up. Then he realized that Gabriel was not following them. "Gabriel," he called, looking back. The boy remained where they had been before, the light around him gradually diminishing. "This is my limit, Richard. From here on, only you can proceed." "But what will happen to you?" Sophie shouted. "My task will be complete," Gabriel replied with a serene smile. "I can finally move on too." Richard understood then this was the price to be paid. Not something from him, but from Gabriel. The boy had remained all this time, trapped between worlds, waiting for Sophie to guide her back if she chose to return. "Thank you," said Richard, emotion choking his voice. "No," Gabriel replied, his form beginning to become translucent. "I thank you. You freed me as much as I helped you." Sophie was crying, torn between moving forward and saying goodbye to her friend. "I'll never forget you, Gabriel." "Nor I you, Sophie. Now go, before the portal closes." With one last look at the boy, who was now almost completely transparent, Richard and Sophie took the final step toward the light. The sensation was like plunging into icy water. All of Richard's senses were invaded by a cacophony of sensations: intense lights, deafening sounds, the antiseptic smell of the hospital. Then, silence and darkness. When Richard opened his eyes, he had fallen to the floor of the hospital room. Alarmed by the noise, 2 nurses had rushed in and were now helping him to his feet. "Mr. Matthews, are you all right? It seems like you fainted." Richard ignored the question, his eyes fixed on Sophie's bed. The girl remained motionless, but something had changed. Her chest rose and fell in a different rhythm, more natural. And her eyes were moving under her eyelids as if she were dreaming. "Doctor," called one of the nurses, noticing the change. "We need the doctor here now." Dr. Carmen arrived minutes later, quickly assessing Sophie's vital signs. Her normally reserved expression couldn't hide the astonishment. She began hesitantly. "It's not possible, but it seems that..." At that moment, Sophie's fingers moved. A slight, almost imperceptible movement, but real. Then her eyelids trembled, struggling to open after 3 years of inactivity. "Sophie?" called Richard, leaning over his daughter, his heart pounding in his chest. The girl's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. They blinked several times, adapting to the light. Then they found Richard's face. "Dee?" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible, but undeniably real. "I'm here, Princess," Richard replied, tears flowing freely down his face. "You made it back." Dr. Carmen and the nurses observed the scene with a mixture of shock and reverence. In their years of medicine, they had never witnessed anything like this. "It's a miracle," the doctor whispered, momentarily forgetting her scientific training. Sophie tried to move her arm, but her muscles, atrophied by the time of immobility, barely responded. Her expression contorted in frustration and pain. "It hurts, Daddy," she whispered. "Everything hurts." "I know, my love," Richard replied, stroking her hair. "But you're strong. You'll overcome this. We're together now." A slight smile formed on Sophie's parched lips. "Gabriel, he was right. It's difficult, but worth it." Dr. Carmen frowned. "Gabriel? Who is Gabriel?" Richard exchanged a knowing look with his daughter. "A very special friend who helped us along the way." The doctor didn't insist, busy evaluating Sophie's vital signs and reflexes, still incredulous at what she was witnessing. "I'm going to call specialists. We need a complete team to follow this case. It's unprecedented." While the medical team mobilized around them, Richard noticed something on the bedside table. The crown of dried flowers had transformed into a small wooden sculpture representing a mango tree. And beside it, an antique watch he had never seen before, identical to the one Gabriel wore. Sophie followed his gaze and smiled again, despite the pain. "A gift of farewell," she whispered. In that moment, Richard knew that the journey ahead of them would be long and difficult, exactly as Gabriel had predicted. But he also knew with absolute certainty that it would be worth every second. Sophie had chosen to return, and he would honor that choice with all his strength and determination. Outside the hospital window, for a brief instant, the silhouette of a boy in a yellow t-shirt seemed to be watching them, before dissipating with the first light of dawn. The news of the St. Clair Hospital miracle spread rapidly. Within days, the story of Sophie Matthews, the girl who awoke after 3 years in a deep coma, reached newspapers and television news. Reporters camped at the hospital entrance, waiting for updates on the case that defied medical explanations. "Mr. Matthews, what do you attribute your daughter's surprising recovery to?" asked a journalist when Richard briefly went out to get clean clothes. "Faith," he replied simply, "and the love I never stopped feeling for her." The complete truth remained between him and Sophie. In the nights following the girl's awakening, Richard searched for Gabriel in the hospital garden, but the boy never appeared again. The antique watch, however, remained on the bedside table, working perfectly, although no one could open it to wind it. As Gabriel had predicted, the recovery path proved arduous. Sophie needed to relearn basic skills, holding up her head, moving her limbs in a coordinated manner, swallowing solid food. Each small achievement was celebrated, but there were also tears of frustration when her body refused to obey the commands of her determined mind. "I can't do it, Daddy," Sophie cried after a particularly difficult physical therapy session 3 weeks after her awakening. "My legs don't work." Richard tenderly dried her tears. "Remember what Gabriel showed in the music box? There would be days like this, but he also showed that you would overcome all of this." The mention of Gabriel's name always brought a special sparkle to Sophie's eyes. "I miss him," she confessed. "Sometimes I dream of the garden, but he's never there." Dr. Carmen had assembled a multidisciplinary team for Sophie's case. Neurologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, psychologists. All were fascinated by what they called unprecedented neurological recovery, documenting each step of the process. "We're seeing neural regeneration in areas we considered permanently damaged," the neurologist explained to the team during a meeting. "It's as if her brain has found alternative pathways, creating new connections." Dr. Mitchell, more skeptical, still sought scientific explanations. There must be some factor that triggered this, perhaps something in Dr. Weber's experimental treatment with a delayed effect. Dr. Carmen shook her head. "Weber has already analyzed the data. Nothing in his protocol explains this." "Then what?" Mitchell insisted. You don't really believe it was a miracle, do you? I don't know how to classify what happened, Carmen replied thoughtfully. But after 30 years of medicine, I've learned there are things between heaven and earth that our science still can't explain. The repercussion of the case attracted the attention of a famous television program about unexplained phenomena. The host, Mark Vance, contacted Richard, offering a considerable sum for an exclusive interview with him and Sophie. We're not interested, Richard replied firmly. My daughter needs to focus on her recovery, not on fame. The refusal only intensified media interest. Theories began to circulate: secret treatments, unapproved experimental medicine, even divine intervention. Richard ignored it all, focused only on Sophie's daily progress. 4 months after the awakening, a new complication arose. The cost of Sophie's intensive treatment had exhausted Richard's financial resources. The health insurance refused to cover part of the procedures, classifying them as experimental or without scientific proof. We need to talk about alternatives, the hospital social worker said gently. There are public institutions that could take over the case, although without the same level of specialization. No, Richard replied categorically. Sophie will stay here. That night, after the girl fell asleep, Richard walked to the hospital garden. He sat under the mango tree where he had met Gabriel and let the tears, which he contained during the day so as not to worry his daughter, finally flow. We need your help again, Gabriel, he whispered to the night wind. I can't fail her now. Upon returning to the room, he noticed that the antique watch had stopped exactly at midnight. When he touched it, trying to check if it needed winding, the back cover unexpectedly opened. Inside was a small golden key and a folded paper with childish handwriting. For when you need it. 27 Palm Street, G. The next morning, Richard left Sophie in the care of the physical therapist and headed to the indicated address. It was a simple house in a quiet residential neighborhood. In the front garden, a mango tree identical to the one at the hospital swayed gently with the breeze. With his heart racing, he rang the doorbell. The door was opened by a middle-aged woman with tired but kind eyes. Can I help you? She asked. My name is Richard Matthews, he introduced himself. I believe your son Gabriel knew my daughter Sophie. The woman's face paled. She called her husband, who quickly appeared by her side. Both stared at Richard as if seeing a ghost. How do you know Gabriel? The man asked, his voice trembling. It's a long story, Richard replied. May I come in? I think we have a lot to talk about. During the following hours, Richard recounted to Gabriel's parents, Anthony and Martha, the entire story. The meetings in the garden, the visits to the dream world, Sophie's awakening. He expected incredulity, perhaps even hostility, but the couple listened with surprising acceptance. Gabriel was always special, Martha explained, showing photographs of her son. From a young age, he knew things he had no way of knowing. He helped people and animals in inexplicable ways. Before the accident, Anthony continued, his voice choked, he said something strange, that he needed to be in the truck with me that day because the girl in the other car would need him later. Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew. I tried to convince him to stay home. Anthony lowered his eyes, the guilt still evident after all these years. But he insisted. And then I lost control of the truck in the rain. It wasn't your fault, Richard said firmly, placing his hand on the man's shoulder. Gabriel made a choice. He saved my daughter. Martha wiped away tears. Since then, we've had dreams about him, always in the same garden, under a mango tree. He seems happy, at peace, but says he needs to wait, that he has a task. The task is over, Richard confirmed gently. Sophie has returned, and I believe Gabriel has also gone his way. The couple exchanged a meaningful look. On the night your daughter awakened, said Martha, we both dreamed of Gabriel at the same time. He was saying goodbye, saying he could finally move on. Anthony rose and went to a shelf, returning with a small carved wooden box. We found this in his room after the accident. We were never able to open it. Perhaps the key you brought... Richard took out the small golden key from his pocket and inserted it into the box's lock. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the lid opened, revealing a collection of childish drawings, sketches of the dream garden, the mango tree, Sophie and Richard together. And at the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope with Richard's name. Inside was a deed. The property at 27 Palm Street, transferred to Richard Matthews' name, with all taxes paid for the next 10 years, and a bank account with funds sufficient to cover Sophie's complete treatment. This is, Richard couldn't find words. Gabriel sold insurance policies to several companies, Anthony explained. We received a significant settlement after the accident, but we were never able to use that money. It seemed wrong, as if it didn't belong to us. Now we know why, Martha completed, a sad smile on her lips. He was saving it for you. Richard returned to the hospital with a light heart. For the first time in years, Sophie greeted him with a radiant smile sitting in her wheelchair. "Daddy, I managed to sit by myself today," she announced proudly. "And Dr. Carmen said we can try the walker next week." "That's wonderful, Princess," he replied, kissing her forehead. "And I have more news. We're going to our new home soon." "New home?" Sophie's eyes widened. "Yes, a house with a huge garden and a special mango tree." Sophie stared at him, understanding illuminating her gaze. "Gabriel's house?" Richard nodded. "His parents want us to have it. They say it was his wish." Tears of joy glistened in the girl's eyes. "Can we plant flowers in the garden, like the ones from the other place?" "All the flowers you want, my love." In the following months, Sophie's recovery accelerated. Each small victory was celebrated. The first step with the walker, the first word written with a trembling hand, the first spontaneous laugh. The story of the girl who overcame a deep coma inspired other families in similar situations, who sought guidance and hope. Richard, honoring Gabriel's memory, transformed the house on Palm Street into a support center for children with severe neurological injuries and their families. The best therapies, the most advanced equipment, and above all, an environment of welcome and hope. The garden, with its imposing mango tree, became the heart of the place. Sophie, even with her limitations, liked to receive children there, telling stories about a special boy who helped lost people find their way back. On a sunny afternoon, a year after the awakening, Sophie was in the garden when a small blue butterfly landed on her arm. The girl smiled, recognizing the unexpected visitor. "Hello, Gabriel," she whispered. "I missed you." The butterfly gently flapped its wings, as if in response, and Sophie knew that somehow he was still around, watching over them. No longer trapped between worlds, but free to visit whenever he wished. Richard observed his daughter from the porch, his heart overflowing with gratitude. The path had been difficult, exactly as Gabriel had predicted. Sophie still faced daily challenges. Her motor coordination remained compromised, her speech sometimes failed, and occasional seizures reminded them that the battle was never completely won. But there were also unexpected joys, the creativity that blossomed during recovery, transforming Sophie into a talented storyteller, her extraordinary empathy with other recovering children, and a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "Daddy," Sophie called, waving from the wheelchair she still used for longer distances. "Come see. The first flower in our memory garden has bloomed." Richard approached, kneeling beside his daughter. In the flower bed they had planted together, a single bright blue flower had blossomed, a species they didn't recognize, that they hadn't planted. "It's beautiful," Richard commented. "It looks like the flowers from the dream garden, doesn't it?" Sophie nodded, gently touching the petals. "Gabriel always said that gardens connect worlds, that memories are like seeds we plant in one place and bloom in another." Richard hugged his daughter, watching the mysterious flower sway gently with the breeze. He thought of Helen, of Gabriel, of the invisible connections that persisted beyond the boundaries he once believed were impassable. "You know, Daddy," Sophie said thoughtfully, "I think I understand why Gabriel helped us." "Why, my love?" "Because love is the only thing that can cross all worlds. Mommy told me that in the garden." Richard felt his eyes well up. "Your mother was always very wise. Just like you for never giving up on me." Sophie smiled, holding his hand, even when everyone said it was impossible. Above them, the mango tree swayed gently, its leaves whispering ancient secrets. And if someone observed carefully, they might see the fleeting silhouette of a boy in a yellow t-shirt sitting in its branches, smiling with approval at the garden that now flourished with new life and hope. At the support center, children arrived daily, many in conditions that doctors considered irreversible. Some improved surprisingly, others found peace and comfort in their final days. All were received with the same promise. Here, between science and faith, between the possible and the inexplicable, there was always room for hope. And Sophie, with her wheelchair decorated with hand-painted blue butterflies, had become the guardian of these stories. The Garden of Memories, as they called the place, had transformed into a beacon for families facing the darkness of despair. Richard founded a non-profit organization, uniting doctors and therapists willing to explore frontiers beyond traditional medicine. Dr. Carmen joined the team after retiring from the hospital, fascinated by the recovery cases that defied conventional explanations. The blue butterfly became the symbol of the center, and stories about its appearance before significant improvements circulated among staff and patients. Richard neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. Some truths, he had learned, were best preserved in the sacred silence between those who had lived them. One night, he found Sophie asleep under the mango tree, Gabriel's antique watch in her lap, a serene smile on her lips. As he lifted her in his arms to take her inside, she murmured between dreams, "The garden is blooming, Daddy. They're all there now. Gabriel, Mommy, and all the children we've helped find the way." In that moment, Richard understood that the true miracle had not just been Sophie's awakening, but the journey they had undertaken since then. A journey that had transformed pain into purpose, loss into connection, and hopelessness into a garden of possibilities. Gabriel's legacy continued to flourish, not only in the lives they helped rebuild, but in the love that propagated like waves in a lake, reaching shores they couldn't even imagine. And when the night wind swayed the branches of the mango tree, bringing the scent of the mysterious flowers that now covered the garden, Richard could swear he heard a familiar melody, the same from the music box that had opened the way back for Sophie. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that Richard and Sophie's journey has deeply touched your hearts. To continue this emotional experience, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories about the power of love and hope. Find it right here by clicking to your left. If this story awakened something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Every day we bring new narratives that explore the complexity and beauty of human life. What did you think of the ending? Do you believe in connections that transcend our understanding? Share your thoughts in the comments.